This is the best idea I've ever had.
Look at this, Tony. Look at this.
Oh,
I found a 2x4 treated borate plate.
Okay.
Now this has got to be at least $5. Oh, here's $3.
Timber!
You might as well be yelling pizza.
Timber! I've got timber with at least $10 or $15. I could
Timber!
That's still cheaper than lunch. I got like 13, 14 bucks in here.
Look at this. Oh, I got OSB board. Can you imagine? These things are about $50 a sheet now. $25.
Timber!
$30.
I think I got like 20 bucks
Why
here.
does he keep yelling timber?
$1.25!
You know, Izzy, I think I know how Oscar the Grouch feels now.
I'm telling you, it gets grumpy in here.
A little bit.
Welcome to Between the Studs. We are Granite Ridge Builders, custom builders serving northern Indiana, northwest Ohio, and also parts of southern Michigan. We have been building custom homes for almost 2 decades, and we're really passionate about what we do. So join us today as we explore the processes, the trends, and also tips that characterize today's new home. Thanks for watching.
Again, thanks for joining us today. Today's subject is lumber. You know, when we build a home, after the foundation has been completed, we call out what we call, or actually order out, a lumber package. And today we want to talk about all the terms and some of the components that make up a lumber package.
Yeah, and today we're going to kind of talk about some of the myths that you might have heard about lumber. So the whole show is going to be about lumber. But before we do that, Izzy, you were dumpster diving, and here is a chip. I think this is about a $10 chip of wood now that the costs are up that high.
Can we take the 10 bucks and buy him some deodorant right now?
Come on! I'm not
Well,
that
you
bad.
kept yelling at us, timber. And we got out of the way, but what does that really mean?
Well, it does. It came from when you would be out in the forest and you're cutting down wood to be processed, and you're trying to tell which way is it going to go. Is it going to be going to the mill where they're going to make it into carpentry and building materials or not? But they would yell out timber just to get out of the way.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense where that came from. Now we know timber. Here's what I think we could do. We're going to have a lot of terms today. Why don't we pick one term that you might think would be a little confusing for our audience, and let's explain it in a little more detail.
Well, let's start with lumber. So that can be interpreted 2 different ways, and probably the more common way is like thinking of somebody lumbering as they're like walking very heavy-footed and lethargic. Or in our case, lumber, you know, we order out those lumber packages, and Izzy's right, they yell timber, and then it gets sent to a processing plant, a sawmill. They'll actually scan that tree, they'll look at the grain pattern, how thick it is, and they'll decide how should it be cut in 2-dimensional lumber. So you got 2x4s, it could be a 4x4. Is it going to be a ceiling joist or a stud or a deck post or a, you know, it could be any number of framing components that we send out, but they know when they're in that plant, that sawmill, what that piece of lumber is going to be best used for, and that's how we come up with the dimensional lumber.
Yeah, because I've heard the word planks before.
Yeah, planks, stringers.
Yeah, so there is a lot of
different-
terms for that one. Lumber and timber kind of is associated too. Interesting.
Well, one part about that whole lumber package you're talking about that you didn't mention yet is the OSB. OSB is one of the products that you see on the sides of the home the most, and OSB stands for oriented strand board. It's a lot of pieces of wood that are all pressed together, glued together, put together, and that's what becomes your walls and what we're standing on right now with this decking.
And that's become more and more and more expensive, which we'll explain today for you too.
And within our lumber package, we have what's called bunks.
Ooh.
A bunk is how many pieces are made up. So a 2x4 bunk has 294 2x4s. Now, today that's worth about $3,000, that one bunk.
Wow.
And then when you go to a 2x6, we have about 189 studs there, and then a 2x8 is 147.
But I do want to mention this, that you can still buy a 2x4 and have it delivered literally from the Northwest or Canada cheaper than ordering a large pizza and having it delivered. So keep in
You know,
mind.
that's not bad. That's for about $8 now
That's right.
per stud. So, okay, that's an interesting fact.
Now, I was always confused what's the difference between a joist and a rafter. So a joist is something underneath what we are actually sitting on. It's usually run horizontal, so it could make up your ceiling, it could make up the floor that you're standing on. And rafter is usually something more horizontal, following the roof line.
It's for raking, yeah.
And to add a little bit more to that timber definition, again, the different ways that wood can be used. It can be used as medicine, as paper, as parts of food, actually. So there's a lot of different ways that timber could be, or wood could be used. So when we're talking about timber, it means it is going towards construction type materials.
Interesting. Now, the most important word is obviously our show's name, Between the Studs. And of course, Lonnie and I are the studs of the show. and there's just the members. But technically, a real stud, not just our studs, but a real stud is a vertical framing member that you use in a building wall. So it's as simple as that. And we're going to be talking a lot about the walls, how windows are placed into those walls. We're going to talk about the joists, the framing members. So, guys, we got a little bit of history to talk about. Why don't we talk about history now?
Well, on the subject of lumber and history, it goes back a long, long time ago.
Ooh.
About 400.
Longer than you.
Yeah, a little older than me. About 400,000 years ago, in the area of Nice, France, they found evidence that the civilizations there were actually drilling holes in the ground and putting posts down where they set their huts.
Yeah, well, I can't top 400,000 years ago, but 10,000 years ago in Europe, timber was the main source of construction, and they were building Neolithic longhouses back then, mainly out of that lumber.
Well, you guys can go back your 400,000, your 3,000. Let's just talk about 300 years ago. Colonial U.S., Jamestown. That's when they really started using the construction materials around here, and what they were using was a white pine. Then in 1623 is when they started their first wood mill.
Oh.
And in the 1800s, they were using men and animals to pull down the trees and do the logging. And just think, right now, it's such a dangerous thing to do. Imagine back in the 1800s.
Well, and technology has improved that we now use railroad cars, which we were at home lumber. We use semis and trucks and even helicopters. I mean, there's so many more great ways to make this something that is easy to happen.
Okay, now that we've talked about that, there's another interesting fact that I thought was fun. Everybody has heard of softwood and hardwood. Well, a lot of times you don't understand, a hardwood is not what you think. It's not hard, and a softwood is not soft. So why don't we explain that one real quick?
Yeah, so softwood is wood that comes from typically conifer trees or evergreens, those kinds of trees, and we do use that quite a bit for our lumber.
Yeah, my Christmas tree. I could
Yeah, pines.
Wait, by the way, that is worth a lot of money right now.
And sometimes they call that SPF. You'll hear that term thrown out a lot. So the SPF, spruce, pine, firs, it's kind of, again, all those Christmas tree looking type of trees make that really good construction lumber, which is that soft lumber.
And hardwoods are deciduous, and they shed their leaves.
Interesting.
And then there's a kind of this third category, and it's called engineered lumber. And what that is the LVLs, the glue lams, and essentially what we're doing is we're taking components of these soft and hard types of trees, and an engineer has come up with ways to use chemicals, whether it's glue or some other force, and they're able to build a stronger component with these materials. So they can make studs with engineered lumber now. You'll see studs that are LVL. LVL stands for laminated veneer lumber. So it's just taking a bunch of little veneers, gluing them, pressing them together, and it makes a very, very strong component. And it's one of the things we use a lot, especially on our basement decks, to hold a lot of extra weight.
Okay, before we break off and start talking a little bit about framing members, roofs and things like that, what about fun facts on wood and lumber? I've got one. For instance, aspirin. What does that have to do with trees and wood?
Well, I know, Tony, when we get the bill, you need an aspirin.
That's actually good, but no, that's not it. A lot of pharmaceutical drugs have been started from wood. For instance, aspirin was from a willow bark. Isn't that interesting?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think you've seen that like in movies before where they're chewing on pieces of wood.
That's probably, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I know one thing when it comes to trees. I love trees. That's before we make them into lumber. It's estimated that a tree or trees properly placed on a lot can increase the value. Even appraisers say this, up as much as $10,000.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Well, you guys know what I found interesting? When I was younger, I used to get these like wooden airplanes that you put a rubber band on and you spin up and throw it. And that wood was always so light. And that's actually balsa wood, which you could probably get at Phil's Hobby Shop if I had to guess. That is a hardwood, but if you remember, that stuff would break so easily. And that goes back to how you can't guarantee just by the feel of it if it's soft or hardwood. It really comes down to how the tree's made up.
Isn't your watch that balsa wood?
Yeah, probably. It's extremely light.
One thing that I learned about it is trees mean water. If you have 1 acre of maple trees, that is going to put off 20,000 gallons of water.
Wow.
Well, the United States is the largest user and producer of pulpwood. We produce about 1/3 of what's in the world.
Oh, wow.
And the U.S. along with Canada produces about 1/2. Now in the world there's about 23,000 different varieties of trees. The United States has about 1,000, and of those we use about 100 different tree species for our lumber.
That's amazing. Cool.
I think it's interesting that trees typically will never die of old age. They will die of diseases or insects, or we will be cutting them down, things like that, but they're never going to just get too old. So I think that's really cool.
Well, and part of the reason that they can continue to last a long time too is because trees talk to each other. Now, you might be saying, I've never seen a tree get up and move when it's getting warned of something. But what does happen is that certain trees can release a chemical called tannin, which is a repellent. It scares away bugs. Bugs hate it. And so if one tree is being infested by bugs, it'll release more tannin, and it'll also let other trees know that they should do the same in order to try to preserve that forest.
Interesting. Now, Luke, I think you're going to help us out with some numbers. Everybody's waiting. The audience is waiting
Right.
for this. So in the last year, how much have things increased lumber-wise?
Yeah, I mean, it's been all over the news that, lumber prices are spiking and lumber availability. Well, I can guarantee you we've not had a house sit because we're waiting on lumber. So we've been able to work through that, but the cost is another thing. So we used to be able to buy a 2x4, 9-foot tall stud for about $2.50, $3. Now it costs $10. The no sand guarantee used to cost us about $21 per sheet. Now we're we're over $70 for that.
Wow.
The roof decking, the 4x8 sheets, which are 1/2 inch on our houses, we used to be able to get those for about $18. Now we're paying $50 for those. The things that we build our rafters out of, the 2x8s by 24 feet long, and we used to be able to get those for around the $20 range. Now we're paying $70 for it. And the list just goes on and on. So it is absolutely true that the cost of lumber has gone up, but that interest rates are still good. Our financing, as we've been talking about, everything, we're still building houses, and it's still a great time to buy houses.
All right, guys, let's go talk about some framing members, maybe studs, and let's get some nomenclature. How's that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good. A lot of times when we're talking about lumber and framing, people think about sticks in the air, but really it starts off way before you see those first studs being hung up, right?
Right, so we're sitting on a basement deck. So underneath us is literally a basement for this house, and the first time the framers show up on the job site is to put this deck on. And that term sometimes confuses people because they associate a deck with something that protrudes off of the house.
Correct.
Or something you'd sit on to, enjoy a view. Well, this is essentially framed the same way that a traditional deck is framed, but this ties all those basement walls together, and it gives it all the rigidity, and it makes it a very nice, strong box.
Now, one thing when I see this, I always see these 200-day guarantee on some of this. What does that even mean?
Right, so let's go through the components here. So what we're sitting on here is a 200-day, no sand guarantee, 3/4 inch, tongue and groove sheet of OSB. So this is about $70 per sheet right now.
Wow.
So it's extremely expensive, but we've elected to put this on because, as you can see, this basement deck is exposed to the weather.
Right.
And it takes us about 2 weeks to get it where the framers are back here and they can start framing the roof on top of it. But in that 2 weeks, there can be rain, there can be snow, and this has a special coating on it to make sure that these seams don't start to swell up. If we were to use just traditional 3/4 inch OSB, you'd start to see them pucker, and then we need to sand this whole basement deck before we put flooring on it.
Sounds like a lot of extra work.
Yes. So as we're kind of going down, now below this sheet of OSB is what we call I-joist.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. So you can kind of see it on the side here, but we have a kind of a mock-up here of what an I-joist is. So we have a bottom cord, which is thicker than a traditional dimensional lumber. So traditional dimensional lumber, so 2x12s.
Okay.
You can deck a basement with 2x12s, but you can see it's a very narrow nailing and gluing surface. With this, it gives us a lot of extra width and rigidity. And then between these top and bottom cords is a sheet of OSB, which when you use this dimensional lumber, you can only drill a hole about 2 inches. We can drill a hole all the way out of that OSB, allowing us to put plumbing pipes, heating pipes through there, so it creates less drops in the basement, less bulkhead, so it keeps that ceiling height of that 9 foot that's very comfortable.
And structurally, they're the same.
Structurally, these are actually stronger because you can span almost 18 feet. With these, it's more about 14 feet. So you can get more open space in that basement, which is what people like. They don't like to have basements all chopped up.
Now on the I-joists that we're using, we put them on the basement to separate the basement from the top floor. But we also do them again, don't we?
Yeah, so if this house was a 2-story, you'd see the same structural component here that we're talking about with the I-joist and the decking on between that first floor and second floor, which gets into platform framing, which we're going to talk about later in this episode.
Well, the biggest question we get right now is housing still affordable? And the answer is with Granite Ridge Builders, yes it is. Now we sell a lot of homes, people have cash or they have a substantial down payment. Some maybe have 5%, 3.5%, but we probably have the best kept secret here in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Right, and not just in Fort Wayne, but in the 13 surrounding counties where Granite Ridge works, we've got a program that requires nothing down, very minimal closing costs, under $2,000, and payments from the 900s. And it's actually a lot cheaper than renting. And we're talking about brand new homes, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, ranch, 2-story homes. And this here area right behind us here is a really good example of that.
You're right. We're out here in southwest Allen County, southwest Fort Wayne and Magnolia Meadows. And this is an area where we have sold many homes with no down payment.
You're right, and we're talking about interest rates under 3% right now on a 30-year or 33-year fixed loan program. It's no other better way to buy a house.
Now I know you've heard concerns and rumors about lumber and prices going up, but with the financing that we have available, that is not a concern. Give us a call. Granite Ridge Builders has a home out here just for you.
Hey, welcome back. I'm standing here with Kayla Stewart and also Luke Hoffman. They are part of our construction management team that's second to none. And Luke is actually the vice president of the Fort Wayne Home Builders, and he's also got a construction management degree and also all kinds of initials after his name. I don't know, but as it relates to construction, this guy knows his business. And we're standing here in the garage. We want to talk about some changes in our rules and guidelines, laws as it relates to framing today, particular codes. And we're standing here in the corner for a reason, aren't we, Luke?
Right, and this is one of the most important corners whenever you're building a house to make sure that it is structurally sound. And there's some codes that we're going to break down today that really talk about how we strengthen the entire house just with this corner.
Now, before we do that, we probably want to define one of the key terms that we're going to be talking about, which is portal. So portal is something that is either a doorway or entryway, pretty much a cutout into your structure to be able to come in and out. So that is a portal.
Right, and you mentioned portal, Kayla. So this is the garage door we're standing right next to, which is on every house the largest opening that we have, the largest portal that we have. So, and as they say, that if you lose this header, you lose the entire house. And it kind of relates to tornadoes or some straight wind events. And let's look at some of these videos. I think this will make a little bit better understanding if we show the videos, then explain why we need to do what we do on these houses.
So you guys were just talking about these tornadoes, natural disasters, things like that, but there are two major events that really changed the codes and how we started framing like we do today. One of them would be the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. That one was absolutely major and influential in the way we frame things. But one that's probably even more common that people will remember is the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 on October 8th. Most people know this story, of course, that it was high winds, super dry for a really long time, and it was the cow that started the whole entire fire, and there was 90,000 people that became homeless overnight because of this fire. Now, astonishingly enough, only 300 people died, but that's still such a travesty, and it's really where we started to make all these changes.
Yeah, and my understanding, there are a lot of architects moved into Chicago because it was kind of a blank slate. They were able to just have this blank slate that could create anything, and I think Frank Lloyd Wright kind of took advantage of that time.
Absolutely. If you've been in Chicago, you've probably seen that's where he got a huge start in creating a lot of the architectural designs that we've seen because of what they could do in that area at that time.
So the subject is framing, and particularly portal framing. We mentioned that. Give us an understanding of that in this garage, for example.
Right, so we mentioned the natural disaster of the fire. Well, again, tornadoes, as we showed the videos, and straight line winds, which we get a lot of those around here. This garage area, and especially this corner and the other corner flanking the garage, are the two areas most susceptible to that area. Now, on a really big wind event, the garage door itself is just going to blow.
I've seen that actually happen.
Yeah, we've seen that. But in this case, we've actually extended the header all the way to the corners, so that that header is braced with these walls going down the side of the garage. We've done a few other things, and we have to nail it every 3 inches into these studs, into these headers, into that OSB. So what that OSB does is it just locks all those framing components together, making it a very strong, and I like to refer to it as like a giant pillar. So we built a very strong pillar here. We've tied it into the foundation with some major bolts, with some major washers.
Right.
So again, from the roof down to the footing there, everything is tied solid. Now, we talk about how natural disasters sometimes shape our codes, but sometimes trends do too. So we talk about just in the garage here, what's the biggest trend right now in houses?
Windows.
Windows.
Yeah.
Windows for sure. So if you get a big bank of windows or a big tall wall, those are other areas where we have to do this portal framing to make sure that everything is solid.
Yeah, you can break a window, but not very often do you break a wall. So making everything more solid, it works.
So portal framing can be a very complicated thing. We've just barely scratched the surface. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. Call me. We'll talk through it. It's a fascinating subject. It's a very thing that's safe, and we're building these houses right. And in fact, we're leading the way. We're talking to engineers every day to figure out how we can improve our houses.
Call us.
Well, when it comes to wall framing, it can get very complex when you have a window.
Yeah, as you can see behind us, this is what a typical wall looks like. You have the studs just 16-inch on center. You got a top plate and a double top plate and a sill plate. That's pretty much wall framing. When you look over here to my right, there is a lot more pieces that come to this. So let's just kind of start at the top and break our way down this window to see how it's framed.
Okay, let's start. We've got a header.
Yep, but on top of the header, we forgot about it's hard to see because we have a
top
cathedral
plate.
ceiling, but we got a top plate and then a double top plate. So there's two pieces running horizontal. Then yes, you have the header next. Now the header, these windows are designed to not support any weight other than their own weight. So all of the weight from the roof we have to then transfer to the side of the window and then down to the foundation. So that's the sole purpose of the header, is just to transfer the weight to the side of the windows.
Now, when I look at this window, I see some gaps, and there's a purpose for this right here.
Yeah, so when they do the rough framing for this window, they'll frame it all in and then they'll put the window in place. That half-inch air gap there does a couple things. One, it allows us to get some insulation in there, but two, it allows us to make sure that window is perfectly plumb, because the operation of these windows is key to make sure this is plumb, square, and that way they can shim this perfect.
So now, Luke, over here, I see 3 additional studs.
You're correct. So we'll start from the inside here and work our way out. So these next two are trimmer studs. Sometimes they're called jack studs. I like the term trimmer studs because if you think about it, that's where your casing would be nailed into. That's picking up the weight off of those headers. The farthest out stud here is what's called a king stud. The king stud goes from the sill plate all the way back to the top plate, and it allows us to nail this header from the side.
Now, Luke, what's holding up the window?
So then the next framing piece you have is your window sill. So again, that's where the window sits down. We have a couple shims there supporting the weight of the window. And then we have these smaller studs, and they call those cripple studs, which then holds the window up and then ties it into the sill plate here. And then that sill plate is triple sealed to make sure it's airtight and bug tight.
Luke, this is great information. A lot of people don't know this because they walk into their house, it's finished, you have no idea what's behind the walls.
Right.
So after window framing, we're coming inside here, and a big difference in the way a house feels is the kind of ceilings we're doing. So we're going to look at the ceiling framing here, the difference between a cathedral, a vault, 8, 9, 10-foot ceilings. What kind of differences are we going to see here with the way that lumber is going to add value to the home?
Right, so we've talked all about framing. So when it comes to ceiling, basically ceiling joists are what we're using typically. We're talking 2x6s, 2x8s. Occasionally we'll throw an LVL there. But ceiling joists, their whole design is to create a difference between the attic space and the living space, support the weight of the drywall, and any lights or trim that are applied to it. So when we go with flat ceilings, you're just going to have a ceiling joist that runs just horizontal, whether it's 8 foot or 9 foot. Makes no difference. That ceiling joist is just going to create that flat space for that ceiling there. Now cathedrals in here, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. It's going to follow this rafter line here, which we're going to talk about rafters in a second, but then over here to my left, these ceiling joists, they're still joists even though they're running more of a raking. Those ceiling joists are cut at an angle to mimic the rafters on this side. And then when we talk about vaulted, same thing, it's following the rafter lines, and then you just put a flat side here, so just one slope. And then the box trays, again, you got the ceiling joist at 8 foot or 9 foot, and then you run an LVL there, and then you just frame another ceiling joist on top of that. So that's pretty much it.
All right, so there's lots of different ways we can add value to a home, give it a different feel completely by the type of ceiling joist we use.
One of the most complicated, beautiful, expansive things that we do is the framing of the roof system itself. This is so intricate. We have all of our roofs engineered to make sure that everything is just Perfect.
Yeah, so let's start breaking down some of these roofing components
Okay.
and the framing members. So let's start with the top. The very top of the roof is called the ridge.
Yeah.
And typically the ridge is going to be a 2x12 or an LVL. Same with the rafters that come off of that. So every one of those common rafters that come off of that ridge are usually, again, 2x8s, 2x12s, just depending on how much weight that needs to bear down on there. So there's a lot of parts and pieces. One of my favorite things to do is come into our houses that are framed and just look up. Your eyes just look up and see everything that comes together, that engineering, and then our craftsmen with here that we have in our area are just second to none.
And when it really comes to this, is a very complicated thing. Questions, please, just give us a call. That's what we're here to do, here to help.
When it comes to framing our roof systems, there's a couple different types that we use. One is stick-built and one is a truss system, and there's a couple differences between the two.
Yeah, so whenever you hear stick-built, that means we're building it on site. So we're building that roof with just dimensional lumber that's coming out. A truss is built in a factory, then sent out to the job site, and then typically put in place with a crane.
Okay, now there's several different types of trusses that you can use throughout the house. There's web truss or scissor truss, which is something that we use for a cathedral ceiling, and you're going to be able to tell that by the slope being quite a bit lower. We also have in the garages, you could do a garage attic truss or storage truss if you want to make sure that there's some storage in your garage attic as well.
Right, and above us there's what we would call a king post truss, there's queen trusses, there's fink trusses, there's hundreds of different types of trusses because it allows you to do anything you want with a roofing system. Now when you walk into a house and you wonder, okay, is this stick built or is this truss? Stick built is going to be built with 2x8s, 2x12s, much large framing members. A truss is going to be built out of 2x4s and sometimes 2x6s combined with a big metal gusset. And then when you look at that attic space, it's just going to be a web of framing. And that's because those components are smaller, they need more of them.
Now here at Granite Ridge, we use both systems because they're both a great way to build a house, and we're the experts, so please come in and we'd love to talk to you about all of these sorts of framing ideas. Now, gosh, look at all that lumber, and then you can tell that, like you were saying there.
Right, there's so much lumber that goes in just to the roofing alone.
Absolutely.
So Lonnie, what are you counting?
I'm counting the 4x8 OSB sheets in this house.
And?
And at 123.
Well, I got to count all the nails. 17,424 nails in this house.
Wow.
Well, I've just been counting the treated sill plate, 321 linear feet in this house.
That's super good. And there's a reason it's green, and it's because it is treated for moisture.
Oh, yeah, it's got borate acid, I think, in it. That's interesting.
About 400 studs on an average home. That's what I'm calculating here.
Okay.
Well, guess what? Can you believe how many headers we have? 241 feet of just headers. And I do know the number of how much that costs. So it's a lot of expense on just headers.
Right, and if we add up all of that you guys counted, for a typical house, it's going to cost about $45,000 for that lumber package to come out. A year ago, it was $20,000.
Well, I'm just glad the interest rates are at 3%, and it really doesn't affect it as much as you might think.
Right.
So.
Well, as you guys could probably tell, framing is one of my favorite subjects, and there's a lot more that we could discuss. So we'd love for you guys to come in and talk to us all about framing or building a new house. And Kayla, will you close for us?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do so well, please pick up the phone and give us a call, visit our website, or even better yet, please come out to any of our houses. We'd love to show you all about framing.
Hey, Izzy, did you include us in the amount of studs in this house?
Look at us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
a couple more.
maybe 407 on an
Okay.
average house.
Okay,
We're
so
around.
Lonnie and I are old studs. Now, I don't understand what you meant by
Right.
I just mean
old
the
studs.
foundation.
Old studs, right here. Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah.
We're gonna have to, this bee is like just really stealing the show, actually.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.